know we're running late on time, so I want to keep it brief, even though I have a tremendous amount to say about the gentleman you're about to see. I've known John for maybe, I don't know, 8, 9 years. I have a habit of following people who I want to be more like on social media, whether they be trainers, public speakers, whatever. That's how I came across Jonathan. When I pitched him to Brad, my elevator pitch was, imagine if the car business met Gary Vee and Tony Robbins and had a kid. That's really encapsulates what John is all about. Everything he talks about works, makes sense, is inspirational, and the concepts that he talks about aren't just applicable to the car business, but they're applicable to all aspects of your life. And many of them I still practice to this day and would not have been able to get through some things that I've gone through without some of these fundamental principles that I think about and practice on my own. So if you love him, well actually if this falls flat, blame me, but if this does really, really well, blame me also. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend, Jonathan Dawson.
Thank you, Sean. Well, I certainly appreciate any introduction that puts me in the category of some of the people you mentioned there, some of my heroes, so thank you so much. You know, as I was listening to the conversation happening, I have my presentation deck, but a story came to mind. And it's a story many of you maybe have heard, but it's probably good to remember in times that are turbulent or uncertain. It's a story of a farmer who needs to grow, and he knows the only way to do that is to go buy a horse for his land to help him become more efficient. But because of the limitations he had at the time, he could only afford an untrained, unbroken horse that he would have to train himself. So he spends all the money he has and he goes and buys this horse. Against the advice of all of his neighbors, don't do that, it'll end up backfiring. He goes and buys the horse and brings it back to his farm. It's not 2 days into the ownership of this wild horse that it breaks the fence and runs away. At which time all of his neighbors say, told you so. We knew this was going to happen. What unfortunate thing it is for this horse to run away. The farmer's reaction in the moment was, fortunate, unfortunate, hard to tell. 2 days later, the horse comes back. But while it was out gallivanting across the land, it brought a pack of other wild horses with it. And so now the man has all these horses that he's now collected, and the neighbors come and see all these horses and say, what great fortune. Look what happened, all these horses. Now you have all these horses. You can sell them and you can train them, and what great luck. And he says, good fortune, bad fortune, hard to tell. His young son is training the horses and trying to break them in. And while he's training one of the horses and breaking it in, the horse bucks the son off and he falls and breaks his leg. To which the neighbors come and say, what terrible fortune that you had these horses come and now they've injured your son. I'm so sorry to hear this. You should have never kept these wild horses. The man says, good fortune, bad fortune, it's hard to tell. Later on, a couple days, a gang comes through town and they're recruiting young boys for their gang. They come upon his house and they find the young boy sitting on the porch and they're wanting to recruit him until they see the cast on his leg from being bucked from the horse. And they go, oh, you're no use for our gang. So they leave the boy alone. To which the neighbors find out and go, what great fortune your son was thrown from that horse. He says, good fortune, bad fortune, it's hard to tell. You know, the reality is when you're in uncertain times, when there's things that are happening and changing all the time, it is hard to tell in that moment. Good fortune, bad fortune, it's hard to tell. And, the automotive industry, of one thing I've noticed in 25 years I've now been part of the automotive industry, is we're very resilient people. We're very, very good at pivoting. We're very, very flexible. We're very flexible people in the auto industry. And so, this time that you're in right now, of course, through this time, in the moment that you're in it, it feels like bad fortune. It feels like, man, this sucks. Woe is me. And there might be lessons that come out of this, though. There might be conversations, lessons, relationships, that might be strengthened. I know the lady there referenced that some of the conversations, because of the difficulty, have drawn her closer to some of her dealers. And there might be a relationship strengthened through this that might lead to really good fortune. That if it wasn't for this current bad fortune, would have never happened. Good fortune, bad fortune, hard to tell. And so I would just encourage you that, be cautious about overly dwelling on those things that you can't necessarily control and that might feel right now like bad fortune. And so as I was thinking about our conversation we're about to have with each other today, and thinking about some of the things I would love to share with you, I want to give you a little bit of context, and if it's okay with you, because we're all flexible here, and I'm overdressed, I'd like to just loosen up a little bit. Is that okay?
There you go.
You guys mind if I... All right, thank you. Okay, thank you for that. All right, I feel better. But as I was thinking about it, there's certain guiding principles that I thought might be helpful. But I want to give you a little bit of context for where the information is coming from. This next little piece for the next minute or so is really just to give you some perspective. I now have, like I said, been in the automotive industry now for 25 years. And in my travels as a dealer consultant, I've now been in over 3,000 dealerships across 7 countries. Later this year, I'm going to 2 more countries that I've been invited to speak at. And part of that tour, I told the person inviting me, I have one major condition, which is I want you to put me in some dealerships while I'm there, because I want to get to know the processes, the people in those countries as well. And when I travel with what I do, I'm looking for certain things. And the number one thing I look for is actually one of the main themes of today's conversation, which is patterns. I'm fascinated by patterns. So I like to look for patterns. And what I've discovered in my travels, in my going around from here to there and working with different brands and manufacturers in different countries, is I found that there's lots of patterns to our business. And so that's going to be a big theme of what I want to share with you today is how looking through the lens of patterns can really affect the way that you interact with people, communicate with people, and ultimately influence the people that you're engaging with on a daily basis. I'm now a 24-time NADA speaker, and I just got announced recently when they made the new announcements that I'll be speaking again next year. So that'll be my 25th time as an NADA speaker. So to Sean's point about the things that I'm going to share with you, they come from the retail side, they come from operations, they come from interacting with dealers, and ultimately trying to see how can we effectively lead people, because that's really what the business we're ultimately in, is a business of people. And that's going to be the second major theme of my conversation with you today. So what I'd like to do is I want to kind of just get right into it with the information that I want to cover with you guys. And I'm going to start with this first idea, this major principle, which is the power of patterns. Now, to illustrate this, I just want to have a little fun with you guys. I just want to see if you guys can pick up on a pattern, okay? So let's just have some fun together, okay? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That's what That's what I was wanting to see. What's funny is, unless I have someone like, and there was somebody else I heard it too. Did somebody else do it too? My man. Right? So when I say 2, 4, 6, 8, the 2 patterns that emerge all the time, and one being the most dominant, the first pattern is 10. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now some people, depending on what you did during junior high and high school, you come up with the second pattern, which is who do we appreciate? And those are the 2 dominant patterns. Now here's what's interesting. I'm going to give the pattern again, and I want to see if you can catch it. Here we go. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 20. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 20, 31. Yeah. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 20, 31. There is a pattern. It's a legitimate pattern.
45.
That's right. So now, do you know how you did that, though?
I do.
Okay, so can you try to elaborate on, and I'll tell you if you're right.
So I took the 2 plus 4 equals 6, 6 plus 4 equals 10.
Okay, then the 14, then 20,
6
then.
plus 8 equals 14.
Okay.
Oh, see,
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know.
no. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14,
Then it was 20.
20, then
Oh, I
31.
forgot to write down 20.
Yeah, 20, then 31, then 45. But that was right. But I'm just curious if you knew.
Yeah, so it was the 21.
No. No, it's a good guess, but no.
Good fortune, bad fortune.
Good fortune, bad fortune. Time will tell if you. All right.
14 plus 31 equals 45.
Right, but Okay, but here's seriously, the next number though. What's the next number? So I mean, just go with your intuition.
65?
65, that's correct. But do you know, so you,
20 plus 45 is 65.
okay, and the next number is 73.
Stop writing down.
Okay, so hold on. I don't want you guys to lose it. Some of you are writing it down so you don't lose it.
So 104.
Right. Now, again, does anybody, are you catching on?
I'm getting ready to write it down, but I'm not sure how much more time we're gonna spend on
I
it.
was like, I don't know if I want to invest the time at this point. Right. Now, what's interesting is, and some of you guys are maybe thinking you had the pattern and then you do the math and you're a little bit confused by the pattern. Because the next number is 93. Sorry? Oh, no, I'm sorry. 113. I'm sorry, 113. 113 is the next number.
Wait, what came after 45?
It's 45, then 73, 104, 113. Yeah. Now, if you're not tracking with the pattern, here's the actual pattern. The pattern is the next number had to be bigger than the previous. Now, that's not annoying. See, now at this point, usually half the room doesn't like me anymore. Because you're like, what the heck? That's the only actual pattern that makes sense. If you actually, I was just saying numbers that were bigger, and whatever number you said that was bigger, I just said yes to. I was like, the only pattern I was going off of was, as long as the next number was bigger, it would have worked. All right? Now, here's what's interesting about life. Sometimes a pattern can be like that. It can literally be staring you in the face, and it can be literally the only explanation, but your brain is overworking and can't really think of it. Sometimes there are patterns that are happening in our business or in our life that are really obvious to someone else, but not to us. And sometimes they're actually really obvious once we see them, but until we see them, we don't really see them, and it's hard to understand them. And so I want to spend some time talking a little bit about the power of patterns and how your brain processes patterns and how to maybe think about things through the lens of patterns and how that affects the way you think about things in general. So I want to start with this quote, though, here. This quote comes from a gentleman by the name of David Salyers. If you're ever, again, looking for a great speaker for a larger event, David Salyers I'd recommend. He was one of the original executives for the company Chick-fil-A. And when he joined Chick-fil-A's leadership team, he was sharing with me, he said, John, my office was a camper that was parked next to a warehouse, and we cut a hole in the warehouse, and we cut a hole in my camper, and I had 2x6s as my hallway into my office. That's how when he said that I started with Chick-fil-A. And he was one of the original people on the team with the cows, with the Eat More Chicken and all that. But one of the things that when I learned from David in spending time with him that I thought was really fascinating was he was charged initially with the growth of the company. He was charged with this one major mandate, which was find out what makes us great and then find out how we can get better. And so from that mandate, he was actually charged with going around to all these different restaurants as they were scaling and growing their business and really trying to figure out, like, what is it that we do here and what do we do great and what's the best practices that are transferable? What are the essential pieces we can borrow and bring to another location, and how do we kind of systematize success? And in that journey of traveling around, he started interviewing all the general managers, and he had a really interesting question that he asked them. And I want you to, for a moment, just pretend that you are a general manager of a Chick-fil-A, and David from corporate comes by and he asks you this very strange and interesting question. And here's the question he asked. What is it that you think we do here? What is it you think we do here? What do we do here? Now just imagine you're a general manager of a Chick-fil-A, right? What is it that we do here? Give me an answer.
Providing good customer experience.
Provide good customer experience. What is it that we do here?
Sell chicken sandwiches.
Sell chicken sandwiches. What is it we do here?
Keep customers satisfied.
Keep customers satisfied. What is it that we do here?
Something with cameras.
What is it that you think that we do? What do we do here?
We feed people.
Feed people, right? What is it that we do here? Back tables. Somebody
Make money.
make money. What do we do here?
Feeding cows.
Saving cows. Saving cows. Sure, I imagine, right? So in his travels, he eventually got to the #1 location, Chick-fil-A in the country. At the time, it was the highest producing from a revenue per square foot. And also what it was known for was it produced more future Chick-fil-A managers than any other franchise operation. more future general managers came out of this one location than any other location. And he sat down with the GM and he asked them the question, what is it that we do here? And the answer that he got was so profound, it changed the direction of his thought process going forward. And the answer was this. The guy said, I see us as a leadership training academy masquerading as a chicken sandwich shop. And in that moment, David said he had an epiphany. Because up until that point, he had heard things like, we sell chicken, we take care of the customer, we're a restaurant, we try to provide great customer service. But to him, it was not really surprising once he heard the answer that the location that was responsible for more leaders than any other location, the location with the highest revenue, with the highest customer experience score, location had a different way of how they saw what they did. And this is where this expression then came from. That how I view things determines how I do things. That how I view things determines how I do things. That the lens with which I see the situation I'm in will dramatically shape the things I think I should do in that situation. And so this idea that has stuck with me since my conversation with David, and I hope will stick with you, is it's really important to determine how you're going to view things. Because in any moment, in any season, in any relationship, in any encounter, you're going to have a choice of how you view what just happened. And how you view things will determine how you do things. And this does permeate life. There are relationships that you no longer have. And if you were sincerely sober in your mind and tracked yourself back and thought, you would go to a point where you said, at that moment's when I decided to view it differently. And that relationship ended. And maybe for the good, maybe not. Again, time will tell maybe. Good fortune, bad fortune, who knows? But there are relationships that started because of that. There are job opportunities that started with that. There are revolutionary things that happen in society because people start to view things differently. And so how we view things determines how we do things. And with that in the background, I want to talk again about how we view the patterns that are happening in our business and happening in our relationships and happening with our encounters with dealers and the people that we're ultimately trying to serve. So we're going to do another fun exercise together. Some of you are familiar again with this story, so please don't ruin it for others if you're familiar with the story. But this story comes out of World War II. Bomber planes were being sent out doing these raids, doing these runs. And essentially the engineers were tasked with a responsibility. Get more of our soldiers home. Get more of our planes home. And what they did is they wanted to look at data, like many of us want to do. Somebody said, hey, can we look at the real data on how many of these cars are actually coming back? We need data so we're not just making emotional reactions. So what they did is they plotted essentially the bullet holes of these planes that were returning, and they said, how do we make sure that when we send a plane out to do a bomb run, that more planes come back? And what I'm going to ask you all to do is kind of interact with me for a sec. Most of you have a pen and paper in front of you, and I want you to, as best as you can, draw a plane. It can look like the one there. Just draw a plane. And then once you draw a plane, speckle it up, similar to what you see here, representing the bullet holes, so that you have some sort of visual aid to go along with me. So try to replicate what you see on the screen. Some of you are better artists than others. Sir, I don't know how you turned an airplane into a donut. Not sure what. Yours looks like a rubber ducky. I'm not sure where that came from. But yeah, try to replicate as best you can the airplane that you see on the screen. And then speckle it up as best you can, represented where those bullet shots were coming through the plane. Now, you're an engineer. You're an engineer for the U.S. military, and these planes are coming back, and you're plotting the bullet holes, and you're trying to ask a simple question. We have two fundamental things we have to do. How do we reinforce the plane with enough steel reinforcement to secure the plane? But how do we do it with not so much that it makes it immovable, inoperable? How do we make sure it's not so heavy it can't fly, or so heavy it can't have any kind of mobility in the air? So you have two problems you have to solve. I have to protect the plane, but I have to not make the plane just a floating target. And so you're trying to solve that. And essentially what you have to do is you have to decide, where do we put the reinforcement? Where do we reinforce the plane? So what I'd like you to do is, looking at the plane, I want you to draw the areas that you're going to place the reinforcement. So go ahead and circle the areas on the plane that you're going to reinforce. Go ahead and circle those. Highlight those, circle those. And so you circle the areas that you should protect, knowing that, you've got to protect the plane as best as can so it gets back. Now, if you're like most people, you're looking at something like this and you're trying to solve the problem, you're going to probably end up with something that looks like this. And so if you ended up circling these areas, that just means your brain is normal. Okay? Ish. Good fortune, bad fortune. It's hard to tell. Time might tell. Time might tell. Did you all circle something like this? Is that what y'all did? Okay. So here's the problem. Here's the problem. You just put a lot of planes in the ground. And people. Because, see, that's the bullet holes of the planes that returned. See that? So identifying patterns is realizing that sometimes the intuitive thing is not the right thing, sometimes the obvious thing is not the right thing. Sometimes you have to ask new questions. See, if a plane gets hit here, apparently it doesn't return.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? See, in a company or an organization, we can have broken processes, but we're so fixated on where the bullet holes are, where the fire is now. The thing that has our attention is the bullet hole. So we're like, oh, I gotta patch this bullet hole. Maybe, and sometimes yes. But sometimes the thing that has your attention is just a bad distraction. It's a bad pattern. And you need to pause, as one of the examples was, just pause for a second before reacting to it. Just be willing to be reflective a little bit. Because there are times where, when you're identifying patterns, you're trying to fix the wrong things. You have communication that's poor communication, but you're trying to solve it in the wrong way. You see, every area, essentially, where the plane gets hit and doesn't come back is the ones that you don't see the bullet holes, because they never made it back. And in an organization, these are the kinds of things that show up in an organization on a regular basis that are the patterns of why people don't come back to a company, customers don't come back to an organization or to a product. It's because we're sometimes fixated on the wrong things. And that's why I find patterns so fascinating, because if you start to think about them and learn them and study them, you start to recognize and ask new questions about them. Because businesses fall into patterns because businesses are made up of people. And businesses fail because of patterns because businesses are made up of people. And people fall into patterns. And so I find patterns fascinating, mostly because I find people fascinating. I'm fascinated by human beings. Every person I meet is so different and special in their own unique ways, but they're also similar in ways, And so I love even when I get an opportunity like this and I get to look across this, big room filled with all these people, and my heart swells with wow, fascination, because I just see a whole room full of weirdos. People who are just different than me. And if you and I sat down, we would find some commonality, but I'd find something you would say or do, and I'd go, yeah, that's weird. I would never have thought that or said that. I would never have chosen that. So I love that, because I love meeting weirdos. That's my hobby. This job I have is nothing but meeting weirdos, which is awesome for me, because this is what I'm addicted to. But every organization then is different, but they're all different in the same ways, because they're all made up of people who are also different, but different in the same ways. Which is why you can have a field called psychology. You see, if you weren't similar in other ways than other people, there couldn't be even a field called psychology, the study of people. You couldn't even do that. You'd be studying chaos the whole time. But the fact is, people under certain conditions tend towards certain patterns. People put in certain situations tend towards certain responses. And if you give people grace through the lens of patterns, sometimes that conversation you're having that's really frustrating for you, you start to see it differently, because you go, maybe they're not mad at me. Maybe they're not actually even mad at the problem. Maybe there's something else going on. And you start to look for different patterns, because how I view things determines how I do things. So I start to look at things differently and ask new questions. And this is, of course, what I get to do all the time. Psychology is the study of patterns. Sellchology, which is my company, is the study of how people are wired, or why people are weird. This is what I do. I get to help sales teams understand their weird customers. I just yesterday, for a Mercedes store and a Toyota store, as part of the same auto group down in Georgia where I live, I had a room full of their top salespeople, the higher performers from the Toyota side and the Mercedes side, in the room together. And you know what's interesting? Even though the Toyota customer is a Toyota customer and the Mercedes customer is a Mercedes customer, do you know the objections that the Toyota guys were getting sounded really similar to the ones that the Mercedes people were getting? It's the same objections. And I thought that was really, You know, like I find that interesting, right? And when I started first traveling around and doing what I do, I started getting the opportunity to go into different dealerships. And I had a week that was kind of a strange week because I was at a Kia store in Oklahoma, and I had a room full of salespeople, and I was writing on the board things like this. Like they said, John, how do you handle the customer who's just looking? And the person who's not buying today? And the customer who just wants your best price? And how do you deal with these people, the Kia salesmen were asking me. And I put them up on the board, and I'm going to talk about all these things with you guys, is what I told the team. And then I had my first opportunity to go to Aston Martin. I had never worked with an Aston Martin sales team in my life up to that point. In fact, up to that point, I'd never even been in an Aston Martin dealership. And now I'm in a room filled with Aston Martin salespeople. These are the James Bond of car salespeople, right? And I'm like, I'm intimidated. And I said, what are your biggest challenges? What do you run into? The guy raises his hand. He says, what do you do with the guy who's just looking? Okay, let's put it on the board. What about the guy who's not buying today? What about the one who just wants your best price? And I said, am I back at the Kia store in Oklahoma? This is nuts. Aston Martin, how is this possible? And then I got my first international opportunity. Actually, it was an Audi dealership in Volgograd, Russia. And now I'm in Volgograd, Russia at an Audi store, which, by the way, they had a bar in the dealership show floor, their own actual full-service bar. So y'all should think about leveling up. You want to have calmer customers in some ways. Closed deals may be easier. I don't know. Good fortune, bad fortune. Time might tell on that one. But so right, let's just do a couple shots and let's talk about your trade value. But so I'm there, and I had a translator, but there was a salesman, Yvonne, and he spoke English. And Yvonne says, John, biggest problem we have here, customer just looking. Not buying today. Best price. John, how you deal? He says. And I'm like, I'm back at the Kia store in Oklahoma. This is nuts. And then I went to SsangYong and LDV in New Zealand for the first time. And I had never even heard of these brands. Maybe you've never even heard of SsangYong. Do you know what a SsangYong is? I didn't either. I'd never even heard that there's a manufacturer called SsangYong. They make SUVs. LDV. I'd never heard. I got invited to speak and work, so I got there. I had a room full of salespeople in Auckland, New Zealand, and a guy raises his hand. He says, "You got a duck on the pond, yeah?" I said, "I'm sorry." "A duck on the pond." I said, "A duck on the pond." "Yeah, out on the yard." I said, "Out on the yard." "Are you seeing a customer on the lot? Is that what you're saying?" He's like, "Yeah." I said, "Speak English, man. Help me out a little bit." He says, "They're just looking. They're not buying today. They just want your best price. How do you deal with them, mate?" I'm like, I'm back at the Kia store in Oklahoma. And I tell you, as I've traveled and worked with organizations, whether it be management teams or speaking at conferences or working with individual salespeople, I just find that people are just people. They're all different, but in the same ways. And so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to show you, if I can, some of the reasons why you're surrounded by weirdos. And some of the reasons why the conversations you have are so frustrating is because you want them to not be so weird. You want them to think exactly like you. It would bring you great comfort if they just understood you and if they just listened to you. And so we're going to talk about that for a moment here. So the best way to influence somebody is to find out what already influences them. Tony Robbins, many of you would know the name, big hands, big teeth, right? Tony Robbins, bigger than me. He said the best way to influence somebody is to find out what already influences them. Some of you are in conversations with coworkers. Some of you are in conversations with clients. Some of you are in conversations with your spouse or with your kids. And you just wish they weren't the way they were sometimes. You just wish you weren't talking to a weirdo. And so what I found, at least that's been helpful for me to have grace towards those conversations, is to just remember it's just a weirdo. That's all. That's all it is. I'm just talking to somebody who's wired different than me. They don't have the exact same emotional context that I do. They don't have the same perspective I do. They don't have the same experiences that I do. From their world, their reaction seems perfectly rational, even though from my world it doesn't. But that's all it is. They're just wired different, and I have grace. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 6 patterns. And these 6 patterns, I think you'll find in yourself. As I describe them, in fact, there's a really good chance as I'm talking about these 6 patterns that some of you will actually look across the room, maybe even occasionally be tempted to point at somebody and be like, oh my God, you're talking about them. But some of these examples that I'm going to share with you are the way people are wired. You're going to recognize your spouse, you're going to recognize yourself, you're going to recognize your kids, you're going to recognize your coworkers in some of these examples. And so as you look at these, like I said, if you want to point across the room and snicker a little bit, all in good fun, okay? But here are some of the patterns that are why people are weirdos and why they're wired so differently than you. I'm going to put these opposing, but they're not truly opposing. They just seem to be. But we're looking at the need or the wiring of certainty versus the wiring of variety. Let me kind of describe these a little bit and show you how they work and how they play out in real life. High certainty people are people who are wired where unless things are very clear and very concise, their brain doesn't really process or function very well. They thrive in environments where things are very detailed, where things are timely, where things are organized. They like things to be systematic. Their brain actually can really thrive in an environment where there's a lot of structure because they're wired in such a way that they need that certainty to give them a type of peace about their environment or about their situation. There are people who are the literal opposite of that you maybe have recognized. People who thrive in environments where there's change, environments where there's uncertainty, environments where there's a lot of variety, a lot of differences, a lot of new things, and they just thrive in those environments. And what's really interesting is when you have these two people try to hang out together, right? And somebody wants to plan things, and it's like, why do we have to plan everything? Why can't we just go with the flow and see what happens? And the other person's like, because that's nuts, you crazy weirdo. Because nothing would get done. No, that's the point. Cool, amazing new things we could have never thought of will get done. The other person's like, that sounds terrible. Right? So this happens, of course, in an organization. Maybe you have a manager who's high certainty. And so they want things to be a certain way. They want a schedule to be kept a certain way. They want a certain outline. They want to be emailed a certain report a certain way. And they need it to happen that way because that's the way their brain works. But they have somebody working on their team who's high variety, who's like, I don't understand why you need that much. Like, come on. And you get this chaos in the relationship, this dynamic breakdown because you have two people wired different, trying to be in the same relationship, but not appreciating that they're just working with a weirdo. That's it. There's nothing personal going on. You think they're doing that to you on purpose. You think they're trying to control you. They're not trying to control you. They're just high certainty. But it comes maybe across that way. Maybe they express it that way. Or you think the other person's trying to be disrespectful by not being prepared. And maybe to some degree it is disrespectful to not be prepared. But it's also possible they're just high variety and they're just weirdos who need to not be so prepared. And that's the way the brain works. And when you realize this in a relationship dynamic, whether it's an organization or whether it's, like I said, a spousal relationship or with your kids, it shows up pretty obvious. And when you pay attention to the pattern of it, you depersonalize the emotional reaction to it. Because you realize it's not them trying to do that to you. It's them trying to meet their own hardwired need. And it just manifests in a way that sometimes is very difficult. The next one then is community and significance. Some people are team players by their nature. They need to be in a team. They want to be part of an organization that does something. They don't necessarily need to have the applause. They don't need to be brought up on stage. They don't need their name on a screen. They just want to know that they were part of something. That's enough for them. And other people, quite frankly, need significance. If they don't get the accolade, if they don't get the attaboy, if they don't get the told, great job, then they feel like they're undervalued and underappreciated and wonder why am I even part of this team if I can't get some praise every once in a while? And these driving needs show up in a relationship or in an organization or in a conversation when you have somebody overly asserting themselves, wanting to make it maybe more about themselves than maybe it needs to be. But if you're high community, you look at that high significance person, you just see ego. You're like, why is that person always going to make it about them? What an egomaniac. And then the high significance person who, every time they do something, the high community person says, well, we're all a team here now. Let's not get carried away. Nothing happens by yourself. Like, you socialist, calm down. I did something great here, right? And so you have this dynamic breakdown where you have this idea of these two people, again, wired differently, trying to interact with each other and having this very frustrating moment. And we tend to personalize it because we don't see it as nothing. We don't see it as a pattern. We see it as a personal attack or as a personal, disconnection. And so what I found is that if I start to see things through the pattern of what they are instead of through what it feels like in the moment and pause for a second, I can have greater empathy. I can be gracious towards people. Next two patterns then are the pattern of contribution and growth. Some people always want to know, how can I give back? How can I do something for somebody else? What can I do to pitch in? How can I help out? And other people just want to know, how can I get to the next level? What's next? I feel like there's a ceiling here, but it doesn't feel like it should have to be. And how do I keep advancing? And what happens sometimes is you have somebody who's very high growth. If they're high growth in orientation, maybe they're in the moment kind of focused on their trajectory, and the high contribution person is going like, yeah, man, you're so worried about yourself, but what about how everybody else is doing right now? And you get into this, again, chaotic thing. Now, I want to be clear that all 6 of these human needs that you see here, they all exist in different people at different stages and in different contexts. And sometimes in certain environments or contexts, some of these manifest in stronger ways or show up more often because of just the nature of where you're at. So all 6 of these are good. I mean, there's not one is good and one is evil, but they have both good and they have, I will say, less healthy representations of themselves. You take a high certainty person left without any checks or balances, without having enough empathy for the other person, and they can become a control freak who mandate things to be a certain way just because that's the way it has to be. You take a variety person and you let them without restraint, and they create chaos everywhere they go. You know, walk up to their desk and say, how do you even find anything on this desk? Like, there's not, like, it's a system. It is a system. Sure it is, right? So any of these things to their extremes can be unhealthy. And when you are wired towards one of these tendencies, if you have 1 or 2 that you're dominant in, and you find yourself in a frustrating relationship or encounter or conversation with somebody, there's a really, really good chance that what's happening is you're over here or they're over there. And in that moment, all you see is the disconnect and the disharmony. All you see is the frustration, and you don't see through empathy and compassion. You don't see that it's just a person trying to meet their need, the same way you're trying to meet yours. But they're wired different than you, which is what makes them a weirdo. And that's all you have to do. Now, if I could just ask in the room real quick, because this might be interesting to do this. Not pointing at anyone but yourself. Do you recognize yourself in any of this list here where you could say, John, I think I'm these 2 dominants, at least in the work environment that we're in? These are my 2 dominants. Who could raise their hand right now and just tell me, what are your 2 dominants? Do you mind? What stood out to you?
Variety and growth.
Variety and growth are high value for you?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you felt like you were in an environment overly constrained, it would be very difficult for you, right? And if you were in an environment when you didn't see what was next, that would be very difficult for you as well, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So if I was in your team, if I was on your team, or if I was in a leadership role working collaboratively alongside of you and I knew this about you, I would make sure that when I approach you, I don't approach you with too many hard fixed rules right out the gate. I would trust that you're going to be able to help me navigate the decisions we're going to make, and I would give you a relatively higher degree of freedom, because in doing so, we'll still end up with a great solution, but you'll feel that you were valued the entire time instead of suppressed the entire time.
I think too, with that, when you feel valued, you tend to bring it around the other way anyway.
You do.
because you're
It's easier to reciprocate.
updates and you're
Yes.
gonna let them know what's going on. So
Absolutely.
that's definitely-
Think of these all as having like a hose connected to them that goes right into your lungs. And if someone just steps on that, it's just like, I can't breathe, right? Because if you suffocate this part that I need. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. If I feel like I'm able to breathe in a healthy way, if I feel filled, I can be more reciprocal and more empathetic. But if somebody's stepping on my hose, I'm in panic and I react in panic. Who else recognized maybe 2 up here for yourself? Can anybody else share an example?
I'll focus, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say maybe certainty and community seem to.
Those resonated with
For
you?
me, yeah.
Yeah?
Which makes me a terrible boss for Chris.
Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think it's how we all.
We have an intricate dance, right?
But you recognize it, and that's
Yeah.
the boss, right? He knows how to deal with all the different personalities.
Right, and it's great to have somebody in a supervisory role who doesn't just walk all over your hose all day long, right? That's great to hear. What were your 2 that jumped out?
I was gonna say, I'm gonna focus on 1, just certainty, because it like steps out more than anything. I love clear cut, like processes and
Yeah.
instructions, but it's ironic hearing Chris go first, because we're both in the same role.
Yeah.
And she's obviously on the other
Yeah,
side.
absolutely.
So she's the weirdo, right?
Yeah, oh no, for sure, I could tell. Yeah,
I'm a weirdo.
that's right.
All I heard there was
Yeah.
recommending the switch.
So he had an observation, go ahead.
These are kind of nuanced though, because Chris's comment on variety is sort of like the freedom not being dictated.
That's right, that's an expression of that, yeah.
And Brett's level of certainty, knowing about him, is more his own certainty and his setup and how things are
Yeah.
versus someone else dictating it.
Yeah, that's correct.
So
Yeah.
there's some nuances here.
There's a lot of nuance,
Yeah.
absolutely. And like I said, some of these are contextual, like in the job, you might have to be very high certainty in your job, but then when you get to the house, you're like, I just want to relax.
Right.
Like I don't want to make decisions. you know, because I make decisions for people all day long. Like, I just want to, like, somebody else think for a minute, you know? So some of these are very contextual to the environment that you're in or to the dynamic of the relationship you develop. But what's good is, of course, know thyself, right? Start with which are my two that drive me, and which are the two that I don't necessarily feel like I need. And then it's starting to examine in the relationships I have where I have conflict. Like when I'm going into a meet with this person and I know it's going to be miserable, right? Because I just don't understand them and I think they're basically weirdos, right? It's like if you go into that with the grace and go, I bet you what's really happening is that they have the opposite needs of me right now. And so if I just then through empathy said, okay, I'm going to start from serving them. I'm going to start from filling up their tank first. And in doing so, maybe that creates the reciprocity we're looking for. Maybe it doesn't, but that's okay. That's up to them. But in the moment, though, I can at least go into it with a different paradigm because I'm seeing it as nothing more than a pattern of how people meet their needs rather than a personal attack or a personal, breakdown in a relationship. So hopefully, again, this is helpful. And when you think about this, especially those of us who have growing kids, I have a 6-year-old little girl, and so I'm constantly trying to be aware of where is she trying to meet her needs and how is she expressing that, so I can be sure to both guide it in a healthy way so she doesn't overly extreme chase something down a bad road, but also, again, where is it different from mine? And when I find myself being frustrated with the way she's acting or acting out, maybe it's because I'm not wired that way, right? So patterns are nothing more than amazing opportunities disguised as annoying problems. Another way of saying that then is every annoying problem that you have is really just a pattern. And there's an amazing opportunity behind that pattern if you start looking at it through a different lens, because how I view things determines how I do things. So if I see someone or something as an annoying problem, my brain in that moment will feel very overwhelmed. In fact, just as, again, a fun little exercise, do this as a mental exercise. Imagine for a moment that you come into work and whoever is your direct report supervisor, whoever you answer to, your boss, comes to you first thing in the morning and says these words: I've found 10 problems we need to talk about. Emotionally, how did you feel right now, hearing that sentence?
Am I one of them?
Am I one of them? Apparently I am. Sounds like a Monday. What? Tell me the emotion you felt just now hearing that sentence, though. How did you feel emotionally? Stressed?
I felt a little excited.
So, okay, weirdo. We found the weirdo. Right? Okay. So, but seriously, how many of you, when you heard that sentence, you did kind of feel like, wow, a little stressed? Just hearing the sentence, a little overwhelmed? Like, maybe even some people say, I felt accused. Like, you weren't even talking to me, but I heard the sentence, felt accused. Like, what did I do wrong? Is this meeting only with me? Can I have my coffee first? Right? What's interesting is that when your brain processes things as a problem, it tends towards feeling overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, attacked, and it diminishes your capacity in that moment to solve it or resolve it when you feel those emotions. You don't operate at the highest level of yourself when you're feeling those emotions. But if I had this sentence, if your boss came to you and said this, hey, I've discovered 10 patterns I want to go over with you. Hey, I found 10 patterns I want to go over with you. Now what's the emotion you immediately feel? Curiosity, intrigue, interested. Do you see that?
I actually felt more attacked with that.
Okay, weirdo, you're allowed to. That's my point, but that's the beautiful thing about it. But again, generally speaking, the way your brain views things determines how you do things. So if you view that way, you would maybe turn down a little bit more. But if you view the other one, you turn down a little bit more. The point is knowing that lens is on me. And the lens that I view things through is shaping what I do. And being more aware of that allows me to take the reaction or the emotion I'm feeling and put it through a proper process of assessment. So it doesn't just cause a reaction where you walk away feeling frustrated about the relationship or about the encounter. This brings us to principle number 2, the power of questions. In this principle here, I want to start this off with, again, another illustrative exercise, if we may. I'm going to ask you all to do something that's going to feel weird, and most of you, or at least a good portion of you, will be initially reluctant to do it. So let me make a couple of assurances before you do it. Let me just assure you that nothing weird is actually going to happen. But it will feel weird to do what I'm going to ask you to do. But you're safe. No one do anything to someone else while this is happening. But what I'm going to ask you to do in just a moment is I am going to ask you to close your eyes. And in a large room, to close your eyes and keep them closed for any long period of time feels very threatening. But I just want to assure you, Nothing's going to actually happen. Don't close your eyes yet. Don't close your eyes yet. But in a moment, I will ask you to do that. But before I ask you to do that, this next piece is really important. Don't skip this next piece. You will have 5 seconds, and I will count down. And when I say 0, you close your eyes. When I count down. But here's what I need you to do for the next 5 seconds. Try to count everything in the room that's blue for as many things as you can count. 5, 4, look around everywhere. 3, 2, keep a list. Blue, close your eyes. Keep your eyes closed and try to make a list of all the blue you saw in the room. What else did you see that was blue? Try to keep a list. Try to do it even individually. Different blue things. Count them up. Don't open your eyes yet. What else was blue? What else was blue? If you have at least 5 things, raise your hand but keep your eyes closed. Don't open your eyes yet. Okay? If you have 7 things, keep your hands up. Okay? Some of you said 7. Keep thinking. What else is blue? Try to keep going. Try to get to 7. If you didn't get to 7 yet, try to get to 7. If you have 10 things, keep your hands up. If you have 10, okay, hands are still up. Okay, all right, keep counting blue, keep counting blue. All right, now, with your eyes closed, you can put your hands down, but with your eyes closed, what in the room is yellow? Eyes closed, don't open. What in the room is green? What in the room, eyes closed, what in the room is orange? Was there any red in the room? Try to find red.
There's got to be some red somewhere.
Try to find red. All right, now, go ahead and open your eyes. All right, now what's interesting is, if you ask me now, what in the room is yellow? What was yellow?
Your tie.
My tie. Who did not even think of my tie? Did anybody not think of my tie that I took off? Didn't even think of it? Right? Okay. What in the room's green? Who, stand up for a second. Who did not think of his shirt? Did anybody not think of his shirt? If you didn't even think of it? What in the room's orange?
The pens.
Who did not think of the pens at all? The little pen you were just holding and drawing with. Right? Or gentleman's shirt. Right? Over there in the orange. Right? Now what's interesting, or even red. Who could not think of anything red? Couldn't think of anything red. Look around the room. Is there red now? You look around the room? Do you see some red? Sir, did you think of red? Did you think of anything red? Can you hold up your phone for a second? How long have you had that phone, sir? A little bit? A little bit? All right. Now, here's what's fascinating about the way the brain works. This is why I think this stuff is interesting. It's because when you understand the pattern of the way your brain processes information, one of the patterns the brain uses is questions. And what it does is it asks questions, then it answers them. And your brain does this automatically all the time. Even as I'm talking right now, your brain is asking a question. Where's he going with this? I think I know. Have I heard this before? This reminds me of somebody. He is kind of a tall Tom Cruise style guy. I can see why he gets that a lot, right? So your brain is, though, you're asking all these questions, and your brain does it all the time. Am I comfortable? No, I'm not. What would solve that? Shift my weight. Ooh, that felt better. But now I'm hungry. What do I want to eat? Your brain does this all the time. It can't help it. So when, though, occasionally your brain is forced to think of a question, it does something fascinating. It becomes hyper-focused. And at the exclusion sometimes of other answers, it becomes hyper-focused. And that's what I want to share with you next. The power of questions. So you must be able to see things before you see things, or you'll never really be able to see it. You have to learn how to look for things and how to look for them the correct way. Sometimes when you're in a down state, when you're in a bad area, when you're mentally bad, if you don't know how to look for and find the green in the room, you could be literally missing it. It's right in front of you. I did this exercise one time with the sales team, and I was in a sales meeting with them, and I started with a different color. I started with what was red. And when I ended the question, I said, what was blue? And when they opened their eyes, they all were amazed that they couldn't think of the blue. What was most amazing, though, was the literal room we were in was painted blue. And there was half the room could not think of anything blue, except that the entire room we were in was blue. And when they were looking around for red everywhere, they couldn't see even the room they were in was blue. And so this is why it's really important that you learn how to focus on the right things. There's 3 mandates then of an influencer. If you want to influence people, influence situations, influence your organization, influence a company, influence a manager, influence a team member, these are the 3 mandates you must have. The first thing is to see things as they are, but not worse than they are. Because it's so easy to see things through the lens of what's broken, what's wrong, what's different, Our brain does it naturally because it's always looking for defensive mechanisms. So when we first see a situation, we immediately can notice quickly, for many people, what's broken and what's wrong, what's bad, how it's going to affect us in a negative way. Be careful not to do that. The next mandate then is to see things as they could and should be. What is the direction we're actually aiming for? Get focused on the correct prize. It's like the example they say about skiers going down a mountain. You don't look at the tree. If you look at the tree too long, you're going to hit the tree, right? You got to look at the path you're trying to get between the trees. And the same thing is true here. You have to look for what is right or look for the way it should be. And then you have to make it that way. You have to take personal responsibility within your unique role, within your unique circumstance, within your unique situation within the company, within the organization, that you are going to make it the way it could and should be. You're going to take the personal responsibility to do your part. Because it's very easy to want and wait for everyone else to do their part before you do yours. Or want or wait for everyone else to do their part before you can even think about doing yours. But if you take personal responsibility, what can I control for? What can I do to make that next encounter a more positive one? How can I come in with more of a positive energy and change the dynamic of the room? That's a decision you get to make. So here's the process. This is called the circle of life, and here are the way your brains work. This is the way your brain works. This is the roadmap, if you will. Okay, this is a schematic of it all. You start with questions. Questions lead to focus. Focus leads to perception. Perception then determines my reality. So let's unpack that for a second. Let's start with questions. Okay? Your brain is always doing this. After every encounter, after every situation, after this meeting, during this meeting, it'll happen the rest of your life. Your brain won't stop asking and answering questions. But sometimes it does something really interesting. Sometimes it asks bad questions. How do I help people who won't even help themselves? Anybody ever asked that question before? Everyone ever felt that way about a team or a person on your team? How do I even help this person? They don't even want to help themselves. When you ask that question, though, what starts to happen is you start to shape a certain perception around that question. How many has maybe asked a question like this? How come I can't get people to take me seriously? Does anybody ever thought that about them? I can't get taken seriously. They're not even listening to me. When will so-and-so finally do such and such? When are they going to finally do their piece, their part? When is this going to change? When you ask a question, just like the color, if I ask you to tell your brain to ask a unique question, like a situation that you're frustrated with, what your brain will do is it'll ask that question over and over again. And it'll get kind of stuck on an auto repeat. It's a very natural thing. Your brain does it all the time. It just means your brain is normal. But you have to hijack this process with your conscious mind because your subconscious will take you sometimes into bad spots. So this is the process. You start with questions. Well, those questions then create a focus. Just like I did with the color. When I said you have 5 seconds to find blue, what did you start focusing on when you're looking around? Where's the blue? Where's the blue? Where's the blue? That's blue, that's blue, that's blue. Your brain starts to look for it on purpose. If you say, man, why can't I get so-and-so to do such and such? All your brain will focus on is all the times they don't do such and such. Why can't I get such and such to happen? You're going to focus on all the times it didn't happen because your brain doesn't know how to not do this. So once you realize this is just a pattern of the brain, you can at least become self-aware and maybe have an ability to change it. So all of a sudden the focus is yet again, they don't do what needs to get done. Once again, they're not taking me and my advice seriously. Once again, they're not even listening to me. They're still not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if you start focusing on that enough, what happens is focus then becomes perception. This is basically the way that we now see the situation. You start labeling people and situations. I don't even like talking to the person. That person's a whatever. I can't even deal with them because they are a whatever. And you fill in the blank, but you put a label on people or situations because your brain needs a shortcut. So it's easier to just label them a certain way, and then everything is seen as that label, and that becomes your perception of the person. So all of a sudden the perception is, what's the point of even trying to help them? What's the point? I'm not even going to bother anymore. Everything I say is going to be ignored no matter what, or they're never going to change. And this becomes your perception. So now you have a really great label to describe it. Your brain loves labels because it loves shortcuts. So it's like, okay, boom, put them in a box, got a box for them. Now I can summarize everything they are by that box. And that becomes then your reality. I hate people. I'm wasting my time. I'm just going to shut up. And when they finally lose their job, that's when I'm going to throw a party. Now, you're not supposed to point across the room during this part. That was awkward. But this becomes your reality. Now you just kind of like settle that this is just the way it is. And I mean, how many of us have ever heard people say, this is just the way it is? And it just is what it is. Never gonna change. And you just resign yourself now, you're done. And I just think, what a shame. Because it all started really by not understanding this process. That if you really wanted to change things, if you don't like your current reality with a relationship, with a situation, your current status within an organization, if you don't like your reality, the best way to change it first is to change how you see it. And the best way to change how you see it is to change what you're focusing on. And the best way to change what you're focusing on is to change the questions you find yourself asking about it all the time. And if you can learn the power of harnessing questions, if you can learn that, then you can change your reality. You can literally make things conform to your reality. Because that's what we're all doing anyway. You're living in your own little world, you're living your own little world, you're living your own little world anyway. And so just understanding this just helps me have a little bit more, again, personal self-awareness and then grace towards others. Questions drive our focus, and our focus shapes our perception, which then becomes our reality. So as I kind of wrap this up, I want to give you, again, one more exercise. And this is one that you can just do on your own. This is a reflection exercise. It's not something you have to do right now. We can do it maybe a little bit just in conversation, but I want you to start questioning everything. And here's 3 questions that you can change your reality around. You can ask questions then about your professional situation, like where you are in your career or what you do daily. You can ask questions about your relationships, maybe a relationship you have with somebody that you would like to change, and then your own personal life. I've had conversations with parents who said to me, John, my teenager and I, we used to be close, and now we don't even talk. We're strangers in a house, and I feel like I've lost my own child. And in the conversation and asking questions, I try to get them to try to realize, like, what are you asking yourself, though, about that relationship? And what they end up saying things like, how come I can't connect with my son? Why doesn't my son respect me at all? Stuff like this. And I start saying, well, where does that question take your focus? Where does that focus take your perception? Where does that take you to where you're at now? And how do we maybe change that? So what I'd like to do, just for fun, for a few minutes here, is just kind of wrap up by asking the question, is anybody in the room able to identify maybe a question that you know is not helpful, or an area where you would like to have a better question? And I would be curious if anybody can immediately recognize something like that, a pattern that you've noticed in your own subconscious mind. Is anybody willing to share something like that? I know it takes a little bit of vulnerability. Yes, ma'am?
So I'll just focus on the professional.
Please.
And again, I'm gonna lean on the situation that we're in as a company right now. I feel like I'm constantly asking why aren't the dealers, why don't they just understand, just do it, just take care of it?
Yeah.
Why is this so hard?
Yeah.
And I think maybe I could change that question of what can I do to help you get there?
Yes, right? It's a different question, right?
Exactly, and then maybe some of the negativity will come down a little bit, but it's just so constant right now that I think.
Absolutely.
This was really relevant, and Sean, thank you for bringing him here, because this was one of the most enjoyable conversations I think I've had in a long time.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that very much. Anybody else have an insight or an observation about a question, maybe a pattern that you've noticed that as I'm talking that you go, I do find myself kind of in this loop and it's not helpful? Can anybody able to share an example? Go ahead.
Share something that's
Please.
similar to it. I hear a lot of people say it all the way up and down the chain, which is, who's making that stupid decision? Or what moron came up with that? Stuff like that. And
Don't put that in writing, people, by the way. It's not an email you should send.
and I tend to, in those situations, think like, let's go ahead and assume that decision was made based on information that we don't even know exists.
Yeah.
Can't fathom.
Right.
Start from there.
Sure, right?
Yeah.
But let's just flush that out a little bit. I mean, when you start asking, like, who made that stupid decision? Your brain doesn't go to a healthy place of solutions with that question, right? There's nothing powerfully effective that comes out of that question. But what happens is you start thinking, man, of another stupid decision, and then eventually start going, like, I'm questioning management in general. Like,
Right.
How are these people even, like, and then you get to the point where you're like, I can't wait to throw a party when one of these people gets fired, right? Because you're like, I can't work with these morons. And it's like you become debilitated in your both capacity to change things and even your desire to, the more you become oppressed by bad questions. And the brain, like I said, naturally does this. If you have a bad loop about anything in your personal life, your relationships, if you have a bad loop, it just means your brain is normal. So the good news is you're normal. The bad news is you're normal. And most of us don't want a normal life. Most of us want something that resembles exceptional. Most of us want something that resembles an exceptional marriage or an exceptional relationship with our children, right? Most of us, that's what we really desire. So when you let your brain stay in normal mode, you're defaulting to this type of pattern. And that's what the brain does naturally. But at least with maybe a framework and an awareness of the pattern and of the power of questions, maybe you can change it. And here's an exercise I can encourage you to at least consider, which is take an area of your life that you feel frustrated with right now, as part of your personal reality, and write down some new questions that you know in your heart, if you asked them, if you meditated on them, that you know it would begin to change the way you see the situation. And maybe commit to, whether it's taping them to the steering wheel of your car as I did, or putting them on a mirror, as we mentioned earlier, or putting them somewhere else where you'll have an alert come up on your phone, or maybe it's taped to, maybe just a key word is taped to the monitor of your screen, where you can just occasionally see it and take a second and do that. Because as a young married man, 22 years old, when I got the car business, putting all the time into the dealership, my newlywed bride would call me all the time. She would say, how's your day going? And I hadn't sold a car yet. And so I was like, not great. I hadn't sold a car yet. She's like, well, are you going to sell one today? I'm like, I hope so. I really do. Then 2 hours later, she called, how's your day going? Well, I still haven't sold a car yet, so not great. She's like, okay, well, are you going to sell one today? I really hope so. By the third time I get a phone call and I see the caller ID, I'm ignoring my wife. Because I'm like, why is she nagging me? Why does she keep bothering me? Right? Why doesn't she leave me alone so I get some work done? Well, imagine the young 22-year-old brain starting to think of his spouse, his lovely bride, as a nagger. There's a lot of divorced men who at one time didn't check their questions about their spouse and their intent. I had a friend, a general manager, who's now my partner, by the way, and it was shared earlier. I now am a dealer, so I'm all in on the retail business, people. I just bought a dealership a month ago, so I have a car dealership too. Thank you. But my partner in the dealership, who's my operator who runs a store, I was at his dealership one day, sitting there as a consultant, as a trainer, working with his team. And as we were talking, he picked up his phone and he kind of like gestured and put it down. A little bit later, he did it again. And I was like, do you need to get that? He's like, nah, man, it's just my wife. And I said, what's going on? He's like, who knows? It could be anything. I'm like, do you want to get it? He's like, it's probably something silly with the kids or something. I said, okay. I said, does that happen a lot? He's like, all the time. He's like, I know, she knows I'm at work. I mean, she knows I'm trying to work. I'm trying to take care of the family. But she won't stop. I said, I have a way of stopping that if you want. I mean, I have a psychological hack thing you can do that she'll stop. He's like, seriously? I said, yeah, it's really easy. Do you want to do it? He said, absolutely. He said, I need this to stop. I can't have her bothering me all day. I said, yeah, it's really simple. Get out a sheet of paper. Watch. All you got to do, get out a sheet of paper, get a pen. Okay. Now write down the names of all the other men in the world you'd rather she contacts. And then you're going to give it to her. And you're going to say, the next time something scary happens, the next time something sad happens, the next time something important happens, the next time nothing happens, call any of these men but me. And I promise you, my friend, she'll never call you again. In that moment, he was spiraling in a bad place because he had let a question haunt him over and over again. The wrong question. Why does she keep doing this to me? Why doesn't she understand what I'm doing? And I think we are all just a couple bad questions away from some bad decisions. So I leave you with this. How I view things determines how I do things. Start questioning why you're so frustrated and looking at it through a new lens, new pattern, and start asking new questions. And if you do that, you can change your reality. Here's my contact information. If I can ever be of service, thank you so much, everybody.
That was awesome. I think Chris said it very well, right? Which was, Sean, you were nervous in the beginning. Do you feel safer now?
Yeah.
Seriously.